Hello and welcome to Groovecast, the podcast for the rhythm section with me, Ashley Walker.
And me, Charlie Smith.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about tutors and sort of the books that we might have used in our musical upbringing, DVDs, that kind of thing. And I know I'm going to hand over to Charlie. We talked a little bit about the online learning and what you can do with that, but so we're kind of going down a different route today, aren't we?
Yeah, this is a little bit more of what we actually did, and because I suppose we're both sort of that pre-online learning generation.
Yeah.
YouTube wasn't as around when I was growing up as it probably is now, and probably the same for you. But yeah, so I thought we'd just have a dip back and look at some of the tutors, resources, back when resources were a physical thing, and some of the other bits and pieces we've gotten up to on our way to being professional musicians, which is hopefully interesting and maybe gives people some insight. So yeah, so I suppose starting with sort of main tutors, people who we've studied with for, I suspect, the longest. In my case, obviously, be Paul Smith, my granddad, who I started with as pretty much as soon as I could hold a pair of sticks, and took lessons at home for the first few years. Then in secondary school, I was having half an hour with him a week in school, which was nice. And then even after finishing all of that, still taking odd lessons with him, serious lessons, not just hanging out talking about drums or doing gigs together. So, and even now and again, he'll come when he comes around the house to visit and stuff. He'll, if there's some new bit of gear or something, he'll sit down and have a play, and I'm always very conscious as to what he's doing, because I think, that's probably something I should be working on. Little things that he pulls out or that he's been hammering through on in his own practice. I think, that's quite clever. I better better put some homework in. So yeah, so he's sort of been probably my primary tutor for the longest time. The best part of, in regular lessons, probably the best part of 10, 15 years. That I was really in depth, taking on his wisdom, and that kind of thing. So yeah, he was sort of the main one, and now, as I said, I still take stuff from him, even not in a lesson context, but doing gigs together. There's still stuff I'll see him play or ways that I'll see him work, and I think, okay, yeah, that's something to stick in the back of my mind for something, for another time. So yeah, there's that kind of thing. I mean, what about you? I know you've had a one main bass tutor for a long time, so let's maybe dive into that.
Yeah, I think it'll have been 10 years this September, I think, that I started having lessons with my bass teacher, Paul, who was the bass player in my dad's band for years and did the ships and all that kind of thing. So, and I still have lessons, with him now, although they mainly consist of a gossip and just playing through some tunes. But yeah, it's been him, and I think it's interesting with musicians, and particularly musicians who have then gone into the business professionally. Speaking to him, I found that most musicians have, if they have, they've hardly ever had sort of the in-school Perry teaching. They've mostly gone outside to get their private lessons, that kind of thing. And for me, when I was at secondary school, I had the handful of Perry teaching and lessons in school for bass lessons. But I know my dad and people like that, they all did the private thing. And but yeah, with Paul, it's started 10 years ago. Started with the Peter Gunn theme. And I'm hoping to kind of progress from that this week. But yeah, and then now it's the same as you, always looking and seeing things he does, and still to this day trying to see if there's anything there that I can take away. And and now it's, like I say, mostly we'll just look at a band like Steely Dan, and he'll get the dots for about 10 of the tunes, and we'll just play through them and then see what I did well and what I didn't do well, and sort of industry practice, I guess we could say.
Yeah, the real world stuff. I suppose
Steely
that's what I always liked about my granddad's teaching, was everything was firmly planted real world. He wasn't really bothered about, let's do rock school grade 1 or any of that. It was all, here's the stuff you're going to actually need to know. Let's not worry about practicing the same 3 pieces for the next 6 months of your life until you can play them perfectly without even looking at the page. It was all, let's look at stuff that's actually relevant, whether it was big band stuff, Latin tunes, all the interesting stuff, funk studies, when I look back over some of the stuff, because to be honest, I kept pretty much all of the stuff he's ever given me, in one way or another, or I since bought the books or any of that, and I look back over some of it now with students of my own, and it brings it all back, sitting in that school practice room when I was 12, trying to rack my head around some little solo figure, somewhere, or a little written fill that's really giving me a hard time, and that endless repetition. But that, I think it really, that style of teaching, and someone who is very much real world planted, really set me on a course, and I'm probably sure it's the same for you. It got you in the headspace for the gigs that you ended up doing.
It's interesting you say that about you teaching kids and sort of reusing some of the stuff. It's because I've only done a couple of sort of little teaching bits for kids, and even people who just ask me, adults who want to get into playing bass, and they ask for how to get started, and I just go straight back to Paul telling me, don't go ahead of the first 5 frets, learn all the notes there. Then in a month's time we moved on to the next 5 frets, and with acoustic guitar I've still got the little thing he did of what the fretboard looks like, and where your fingers will be for a G and where it'll be for a C, and it's the same thing for me, for sure.
It is. I think that's one consistency I've seen with all of the best teachers that I've had, is they've all been very much, this is real stuff. This isn't. We're not just studying from a book because we should study from a book. We're doing it because this, and this.
Yeah, and for me, like you were saying about the real world stuff, it was certainly the same in my lessons, and even to the point of which you can't always get from musicians who are just teachers or kind of mostly planted in the teaching world. But like we'll be playing through certain pieces with a really hard rhythm or a dynamic, and he'd stop me and say, for him that jumps out as if it was on a band scenario or an orchestra scenario. Everyone will be playing that together, so if you're the one that's out, I've been there, you'll look like an idiot. So mate, you like that bar, you practice that bit, and endings, and just really great industry advice. Always, okay, you've only got, with the Steely Dan stuff or Tower of Power, so imagine this is a rehearsal scenario. You've got 30 seconds to look over these. Where are you looking? The first few bars and the ending, any tricky bits jumping out at you, that's what you've got time for. Yeah, here we go then, and straight into it. So I'm sure it's the same with you.
Well, absolutely. That whole thing of, especially sight reading of stuff, is what do you find first? And it's find the roadmap, find where the repeats are, where the coda is, the any signs and bits and pieces you're going to have to jump back on, because that's the stuff that when you are reading through it and you're focusing on the bars, that's the stuff you'll miss.
Yeah.
You'll miss the repeat sign at the end of the line. That means you've got to do it all again. And you'll keep going on, and then you'll think, oh, now I'm really lost.
Yeah.
Or know where that DS sign is, so that when you get to the DSL coda, you know exactly where you've got to hop back to. You're not flicking through pages thinking, oh, is it on the second page or the first page? you know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, all the real world side of that, of and especially looking at stuff where it's like, right, here's a big band chart. There's the figures. Which ones do you play? Which ones don't you play? Learning how to make those educated guesses back then was really useful, and certainly helped when I got into big band playing later on, and had to put all that into use, and especially the way, as we know that big bands work, where it's just pull out a tune, play it, put it back.
Yeah.
You had to be on your guard for anything to come out of the pad. And again, like you say, you don't want to be the one to hold the band back. You want to be the as in with it as you can, and stick with everybody else.
Yeah, and as we both know, and I'm sure we've talked about before, in a band you can't have a bad drummer, or certainly a bad drummer, or even a bad bass player. And in that big band scenario, there's no, that's not exactly like being the fourth trumpet as a young musician coming up. And no disrespect to the fourth trumpet players out there.
No, but anything sectional.
You can't be going in. Yeah, you can't be going in as a drummer and messing things up and not being good enough. It's a big sort of a high stakes thing, especially when members of the band, like I'm sure you would have done.
Yeah, but I always think of it as a sectional thing as well, of that, there's 5 saxes, or there's 4 trombones, or 4 trumpets, 5 trumpets, and you go, if one of those slips something up, they've got the other 3, the other 4 to kind of knock them back into line. But in the rhythm section, you've got 1 bass player, 1 guitarist, 1 keyboard player, 1 drummer. If you go wrong, people notice.
Yeah.
People are going to notice, and they're not going to try and shift the blame.
Yeah, because I don't know if you found it in your scenario, in your big band experiences, but they always don't like the guitarists and the bass players because they've got amps that they can turn up at any time.
But then on the flip side, they go, oh, if it's an upright bass, it's too quiet.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and you go, well, take your pick. What do you want? But yeah, that's always interesting. And of course, now most pianos are electric as well, in that sort of situation. So you've got to kind of get that balance. And it's one thing you do find in some of the big bands is people who don't like turning up.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it feels like they're just not there. Sometimes you just have to say, oh, can you turn up a little bit? I can't hear you. I'm sat right next to you. So yeah, it kind of, there's a bit of that goes on, especially as you say in the big band things. But yeah, I always just sort of think when you're on that, you've got to be on your guard, because there is just you doing your bit. There's not 3 other trumpets who are doing the same thing or similar thing, or a similar line. It's just the bass player doing that bit, or there's just the drummer holding that bit.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so anyway, let's move it on slightly from our sort of main tutors to look at some of the other people who we've kind of studied with, whether it was for one lesson or a short course, or, sort of dipping in and out. I mean, the obvious place for me to start with this was when I was in primary school, and I had a great drummer come in to teach, a guy called Tim Hillsden, who at the time was a young drummer from Middlesbrough way, I think, and he was coming in delivering kind of a rock school type thing of, they'd get a guitar teacher, a bass teacher, and a drum teacher in, give them 15, 20 kids, and be like, right, give us a concert at the end of term.
Yeah.
It was that kind of teaching, So it wasn't one-to-one or anything. It was very much groups. But I was really lucky to get to have Tim teaching, and I'll have been about 7 or something then, so I wasn't very old at all. But he was great, and also I think he sort of cottoned on that I was taking it pretty seriously and wanted to work, and he was giving me little extra things, or I remember one day he brought in a Ludwig Black Beauty and said, "Oh, have a look at this. This is this is the snare or whatever." And little things like that make you feel like, there's a bit of possibility out there even at that age. You think, "Oh, this is something I can take a bit seriously." So yeah, Tim was great, and I'm still in touch with him now. He's since gone on to much bigger and better things than teaching in primary school in Billingham. But now he's been working with Albert Lee and all, touring around America and all that. But he's, it was weird. We went for me, him, and my granddad went out for a coffee just after lockdown or something. And obviously, visually, he's changed a lot. He's got loads more hair now and all that. But it was the same guy who I remember when I was 7. That was weird, And then sort of the other tutors who I've had coming and going were all pretty much at music college. So when I was in London, tutors were on rotation pretty much every term, if not every year. So I got to study with a couple of different people. In my first couple of years at uni, it was the likes of Danny Maloney, who's a really great theatre player. Matt Hector, who worked with Iggy Pop, who was like a real, meat and potatoes, really heavy, laying it down, rock and roll kind of player. It was great. I took loads from him because that's not my style at all. I'm not a really heavy kind of player, but the way that he was playing was kind of, I always thought was really cool. So I took a lot from him. Who else did I get when I was at music college? Getting towards my latter years of it, it was Toby Drummond, who's one of the West End players. He took a lot of my lectures, and the main one for the final year was a guy called Neil Bullock, who's a jazz player, from Birmingham. And interestingly, I'd seen Neil play when I was about 10, doing a big band gig at a drum show in Coventry or Birmingham or somewhere. And there was him and a couple of other drummers on. It was a great show, and I remembered it. And so all these years later, 8 or 10 years later, there I was having weekly 90-minute lectures 1-to-1 with him, going over jazz and brush techniques and all that. And now it's like, this is a bit different. And yeah, Neil's great. And I took lots and lots and lots of stuff from him, and just his approach to playing, because he's got such a smooth style, which I really liked. He's got a real flow to his playing. So yeah, that's just a few selected ones of my time at ACM. I mean, obviously there was way more, people who were great with all the modern stuff with Ableton and click tracks. That was all very fascinating. And then, guys who were more into the funk or more into the pop gigs and everything. So yeah, I got a vast variety, and I'm just plucking a few names out, so I won't bore you with too many details, but I'll throw back over to you, because I know you've had a few one-off lessons and little bits with a few big name guys.
Yeah, well, when we were thinking of this episode and everything, the one that jumped out for me was a lesson I had, again, probably, I guess about 9 years ago now, with Lawrence Cottle. And the little story behind that, which I think is quite funny, is, very long story short, my dad and myself were down there in London for a few days. I think we might have been on a bit of a holiday thing. I'd been playing for not very long, and my dad was trying to find somebody who could give me a masterclass or a lesson, a big player. And we went to this little jam, or sort of do, in a pub. And my dad was speaking to a friend of his and said, we're looking for somebody really good. Who, is there any names that jump out to you? And as he said that, Lawrence Cottle walked in the pub, and the guy said, yeah, him. And my dad didn't know of Lawrence, and he said, yeah, that's Lawrence Cottle. And he was playing trombone at this pub for this jam. He said, he's a trombone player. And he said, oh yeah, he plays the trombone, he plays that as well. As well. He flipping just tears this thing apart, just is awesome. And so we got talking to him, and my dad said, could my son come and have a lesson with you? And he said, oh yeah, come over, a few days later, whatever it was. So I did, and he was so generous with his time and very patient. And as I say, I'd only been playing not very long by that point. The first thing he did was whip all the strings off my bass. He said, they're a bit rusty, aren't they? Because I think he changes his strings before every gig, near enough. So he whipped the fastest I've seen anybody do that. 2 minutes later, I've got these new strings, tunes them up, yeah, close enough, gives me my bass back. And he told me I needed to get my nails cut. He said, if you're going to be a bass player, he said, your nails are too long. He said, you need to get a 5-string, because I didn't have one at the time, which I did not long after that. And he taught me the technique, I think it's called the floating thumb or something like that, where you every time you kind of do this and your thumb holds down the string, and you use your fingers to do, like if your thumb will be on the E string, so you play the A with your fingers so it stops all the ringing, which I had a lot of at the time. And just bits of advice that I still use to this day. Always practice with a click, and any exercises, he had them all queued up there on Logic or whatever the program was he was using on his computer. He just said, okay, well, and then he said, do you know anything? What do you know? And I just learnt Chameleon at the time, so all I knew was just that two little dung 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 dung, and I just was going around that for I don't know how long, with him just jamming over the top with chords, and afterwards I had no idea who he was. Obviously, we got on YouTube afterwards and was like, oh my god. And so that was that, and a few years later I had the chance to do a masterclass with Lawrence and Simon Goulding, sadly no longer with us. But that was a fantastic experience, and Simon did his bit of the the Latin American stuff and the different time signatures, did some awesome solos, which again just jaw dropping. And then on the last day of this masterclass, Lawrence came in. It was meant to be a 2-hour masterclass. He said, I need 4 hours. So we did 2 hours of break and then another 2. And the first thing he did was get us to all get our basses out. He said, no, you're not sitting there watching me. Get your basses out. Taught us all these exercises, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about the booklet, sort of books and that kind of thing. And, there's not many that I've had for bass, but one of the ones that I use is the booklet that he gave from that day, and the exercises and stuff that he did. It was so almost back to basics, but the fundamentals, and you can't do any of the fancy stuff without nailing that, and none of us had nailed it. So yeah, those were the two things.
Oh well, yeah, it sounds like that you got a lot from that. If nothing else, you got some new bass strings and a nice
Yeah.
and a nice set of finely cut fingernails.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if nothing else, Lawrence Cottle was my bass tech for a day, is what you can say.
It's like getting a brain surgeon to cut your hair. Man.
Yeah, I suppose it is. But yeah, so that's really cool, and obviously Cy was an incredible player, and I've got some of his albums which he sent me a few years ago, which are over on my CD racks over there, and they still get spun every now and again. Because he you could tell he loved his Latin music, and was big into all of that, and he was a great percussionist as well. Actually, he learned all of the Afro-Cuban Latin percussion as well as playing bass, and also being a great songwriter. It's like, and yeah, I got a chance to see Cy play a number of times, in different settings, and yeah, every time, just even as a drummer, I was blown away by him. so yeah, it was it's a shame that he's not about anymore. But yeah, glad that you got the chance to study with him a little bit while you could, So yeah, I mean, let's hop into some of the. I don't know. Should we go into books or clinics first? What do you think? Since we're already on the clinic subject.
Go on clinics, yeah.
Okay, change your mind. So I don't know how much you've done the base clinics thing, but I sort of, when I was planning some of this, I sort of threw clinics, but also seeing sort of the smaller intimate concerts into that as well. So, I saw a couple of clinics at a couple of at the drum shows. I remember seeing Thomas Lang doing a clinic years and years and years ago with a double bass drum Roland electronic kit, playing 4 different polyrhythms with each hand and foot, and going, this guy's off the scale, and even if you walk away from something like that going, I'm never gonna ever try to do that or want to do it or need to do it, you still take some stuff out of it, of going, oh well, the stuff he was doing with his feet was quite clever, or the way that he put those patterns one over the other was pretty good. But the sort of the best couple of clinics that stick out for me was, I saw Simon Phillips do a clinic about 6-7 years ago now. I think it was at the Manchester Drum Show, back when that was a thing. Obviously they wheeled Simon's kit on, and it was the full Toto monster, double bass, about 9 toms and all of it. And he sat and played two or three tunes, talked a little bit about his approach and his open-handed playing, and not crossing his hands and all that, and then took some questions, and he was really fascinating, not only just from a playing point of view, but also his approach to things and the way that he thinks about things, not just as a player but as a studio engineer and producer as well. I was like, okay, this guy's got, he had some different ideas on like drum sound, and then seeing him in Ronnie's with his band a few years later, you could hear, it's like he had no gaffer tape on the kit at all. It was all wide open ringing toms, and you heard the kit, as he was tapping around before the gig, and you thought, this is going to sound awful, in this small room with these big wide open ringing drums. And I think they only put bass and snare mics and maybe 1 or 2 overheads over the kit. They didn't mic any of the toms. And then as soon as they launched into it, he sort of went, oh, that's why you're doing that, and because the minute that there's all that other musical information there, suddenly all the ring just disappears, and you just hear this really pure sounding kit. And I thought, okay, because I remember reading in an interview later on with someone who'd been to one of his shows like that, and they said, oh yeah, I sat Simon told me to sit behind the kit and tap, and I said I thought it sounded terrible from the back, but when I stood out the front and heard him play it, it was a totally different ball game. So yeah, Simon's clinic was really good. I also saw a clinic with Ralph Roll from
Chic.
From Chic, yeah. He came into ACM when I was there, and he did an afternoon clinic, which was again fascinating, and talking about his little bit of incorporating using his left hand to play electronic samplers and stuff while playing a groove and keeping it all locked in. And that was really good. And then he finished the clinic by playing and singing "Let's Dance" by David Bowie, which was really cool. Which is obviously what he does in the in the Nile Rodgers on the gig, And so yeah, he sort of this room of 60, 70 music students bopping along to him, as he's getting everyone to shout and clap along and all. It was really interesting. It was very much it was drum clinic meets concert, really. It wasn't one nor the other. He was very open about his playing, and he really was encouraging loads and loads and loads of questions and stuff, and he probably made it run quite a bit over time by doing that, but it was so worth it, because it was, he just knew exactly where it was at. So yeah, I think those were the main 2 clinics, and then the most recent one I that you could kind of call a clinic was I saw Neil Wilkinson, who's become a good friend, do a clinic at the Simon John's drum show in Coventry just later on last year, where he was sort of pulling apart a record called Drum Spectacular, which is a Kenny Clare, Ronnie Stevenson double drumming with a big band, which was done in about, I think, in the early 60s. And they were right really at the height of their playing there. Kenny Clare was an amazing session player, you know, with Shirley Bassey and Tom Jones, and Neil was just dissecting some of the stuff they'd played on that, and it was incredible. But also looking at some of the stuff he uses in his playing, you know, when he's done his James Morrison gigs, or he's just been depping on Strictly Come Dancing for a few shows and stuff, and it's little things that he uses, because he's one of those. For me, he's in that Lawrence Cottle kind of realm of just being top of their game, first call session player, but also a really nice guy, which is always nice. But yeah, I suppose where you would dip back in though would be having seen a few of your probably sort of your heroes play in that very close environment. I know you've seen, you know, we saw Marcus Miller at Ronnie's, and I know you've seen Victor Wooten and stuff as well. So
yeah, I've been very lucky to be able to see, you know, all of those guys that were my heroes: Marcus Miller, Victor Wooten, John Patitucci, and you know Lawrence with his Jacko, the Jacko show he did at Ronnie's, and Joe Dart is another one who I got to see. So yeah, I mean, it's just an education itself.
Well, yeah, some of those gigs are more of an education than even a clinic would be, because you're seeing it happen in the moment with, you know, just and you know that, especially when it's like a Ronnie's thing and there's no filming or anything, you just know that only anyone in that room is going to experience that gig at that moment, you know.
Yeah,
I know we heard about this at the Steve Gadd band gigs in November. I know someone who went to a couple of them and said, oh, you know, you'd be surprised how different the set list was from gig to gig. You know, it was probably 50% the same. And also how they played, you know, some shows they were a bit more sort of not quiet, but, you know, a bit more laid back and a little bit reserved in what they were playing, you know, sort of conserving their energy a little bit. And then some of the shows they were really going for it and getting a bit more into it. I know I was kind of glad the show we went and saw was the very last one, because I think that's when they were they'd done 5 shows in 3 days to that point, and this 6th one, it was just like, right, anything that's left in the tank is just going to be done now. So they it was good to see them, all of them in that band. You know, it was just all of them really going for it. So yeah, from clinics, let's get into some of the books. I know you mentioned a couple of the stuff that Lawrence gave you at the base course and stuff. I suppose if I quickly just start, the book that definitely was sort of the biggest part for me was Dave Hassel's graded course for drum kit 1 and 2, which is not to be confused with grade 1 or grade 2 in any other setting. These are very, very different. Dave Hassel was and still is a renowned tutor from Manchester way, and you know, I think he lectures at the Royal Northern College of Music, if I'm not mistaken. But he's taught a lot of really, really great players and people I know, and I think he did those books in probably the late 80s, early 90s, and all of them are handwritten charts of a style, you know. So you'll have Funk 1 or Mambo Fast, you know. They haven't got daft names. They've just got what they say on the tin, you know. And there's they're like 2 Bibles of them with CDs that were recorded by a real 4-piece band, keys, bass, guitar, drums, you know, or whatever. And yeah, they were what my granddad started me on when I was at secondary school. We started on the grade on the book 1, and looking at Rock Slow or whatever it was, and going through them, and some of them were really, they'd be easy enough with a groove, but then you had either some really naughty written fills or some really sort of clever figures that were there just to completely trip you up halfway through, and you'd have to sit and really work out what was going on and all the little bits and pieces. So that first book was, I thought that was hard, and then I got to university, and within the first half term of university, one of my drum lecturers was like, right, we're going to look at this tune, and sure enough, it was from the second book. I was like, right, here we go. If I thought book 1 was hard, book 2 was a real kick up the backside. We looked at, I think, one of the Mambo tracks from the second book, and it is like an absolute racehorse going off. It is ridiculous. But, to sit and play anything like that it gave a massive sense of achievement when you actually got from start to finish without completely fudging something up. Never mind playing it nicely, but yeah, that was my introduction to really chart reading and really getting my head round jazz charts and show charts and all that kind of stuff, because they were handwritten, which is always nice to see, but some of them were a little bit spidery in places with some of the figures, but in a not in a bad way, but in the way of that's what it's like in the real world. Because I know you'll have seen pages like I have where it's just all over the shop the way it's written out, and those books were the absolute best for me at least, for preparing for that. And it was, and I still, as I say, I still read some of the charts in them myself now, especially the second book. I'll still go back and look over some of the stuff, and I still teach out of the first book. That's, with some of my more advanced students, that's a book that gets pulled out quite often to be like, right, we've been looking at funk rhythms or whatever for a few weeks. Let's put some of those into context and actually get something out of it. So yeah, Dave Hassel was and still is probably my favourite books. But the other book that has really sort of changed the way that I play over the last 4 or 5 years, especially during the lockdowns, was this one, which I'm going to get out because I've got a few copies of this because it's no longer in print, and it's Modern Techniques for the Progressive Drummer by Max Abrams, and this was published in, I think, in the 60s and 70s by Premier Drums. Max Abrams was another one of those renowned teachers who was sort of taught a lot of the pros. I think he taught Simon Phillips as a youngster, and he taught Neil Wilkinson and a load of other big name players who were students of sort of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And this was his book. This was what he wrote, and some of the stuff in it it's not tunes, it's all techniques. It's all, here's a page of stuff you can do with paradiddle, paradiddles or six-stroke rolls or rudiment stuff, but also brush techniques, jazz independence, all that sort of stuff. And it was Neil Wilkinson who introduced me to this book, because he'd been taught by Max, and it's been his Bible for forever. And some of the stuff in early lockdown when we were doing some of the drum hangs, he was playing some stuff out of this, and I thought, right, I've got to get my hands on a copy of it. And basically the only way to find it is if you're lucky on eBay. They pop up now and again because it hasn't been in print probably since the 80s. So I managed to scour. I think I've got 3 copies of it now. So I keep a copy in my teaching bag. I've got a copy here and a copy elsewhere. But it is just the absolute best. And I'm going to just read his little opening statement of how to use this book is an incredible thing. There's a paragraph at the end which I know Neil always refers to, which I'll quickly read out, which is that there's no shortcuts to success. The only way to proficiency is to practice with great patience and with constant repetition. In this way you will make sure and steady progress, both with your reading and your playing. None of us were geniuses. We all had to start at the bottom of the ladder and gradually work our way up, so do not be discouraged if your progress seems slow. Take my advice. It is only those who have the patience to do the simple things perfectly ever achieve the skill to do the difficult things easily. How true is that? So that's Max Abrams' book, and that is my go-to, especially if I'm just sitting working on a practice pad. That is the go-to. And the other go-to, which is a much more recent publication, is that one, Gadamants, which is Steve Gadd's book of stuff he was playing on during the lockdown. He wrote a book of all the exercises that he was working on in his downtime while, obviously he couldn't tour and couldn't do sessions. So yeah, between those two books and then the Dave Hassel books, that's basically my entire drum education. Or the best bits of it anyway. But yeah, why don't you, after my sort of long-winded chat there, you can go into your bass pamphlet a little bit more, and just, maybe if you want to talk about any of the real areas that, I think it was Lawrence who wrote that bit out, that really have stuck with you.
Yeah, other than that, when we're thinking of this episode, I've nowhere near as an impressive as collection as you, and nothing that I could say. I think the first bass book I had was a Beatles book, which I used to death, to be fair, of like the early bass lines. I think Please Please Me, Saw Her Standing There were on there. And then the only other books, other than Lawrence's booklet, were my upright bass studies, the Samandel book and the Bottesini one, which I think are two of the sort of go-to sort of things. And then I have a Chet Bach cello suites for electric bass book, and also Beethoven things written out for electric bass. So. But when it comes to Lawrence's stuff, a lot of, when I was saying about the fundamentals, and it really was, to start with, just something as simple as finding, two Fs on your E string and find two notes the same name on a string, but being able to go straight to them without, just kind of going sliding around and trying to find it, learning all the notes. And he said it might sound stupid or simple, but he said that's, enough that's like a life's work there, or just a scale, like learning all the scales is a life's work kind of thing. And in the booklet there were a lot of exercises. At the time I was really into Jaco Pastorius' stuff, and he said, well, if you want to get into that stuff, you need to, a lot of people are focused on your left hand and the hand that's holding down the notes. He said the reason they fail is because they don't focus on your right hand, and he said you need to be changing finger with every note, even when it doesn't feel natural, because for bass players, if anyone's listening, when you're playing octaves or something like that, I mean, generally you're playing with your thumb and either your middle finger or your other finger, but if you're playing with your two fingers, it's natural for you to use your middle finger to go for the higher notes, because it's a bigger stretch and your middle finger's longer. But he said, no, you need to get out of that. You should always be changing fingers with every note. So there were so many practices and techniques and things for that, and in his booklet, and that was like the first 20 pages of it would, almost were just dedicated to that, and different time signatures just with the same exercise. So yeah, I never got past that page. No, that was the main thing, and then soloing. There was stuff to do with scales. So I used that for years, and the brilliant thing about that course was they filmed everything and put it on YouTube, and so for the people who took part in the masterclass, they had access to the video. And actually, when we knew we were doing this episode the other day, I put it on and kind of I hadn't watched it probably since we did it, and he mentions my name a few times, so I was like, yes, come on.
You were in. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned some of the cello studies and stuff, because I know that's something I think Steve Pearce touched on when we had him on a little bit, of how much he doesn't look at bass books, but he's all about, if he's doing his upright stuff or playing, he's got arpeggios for cello or whatever etudes, that he's been using for ages. So yeah, it's funny how that's got a very direct link between the cello and the bass in that sense, and
Yeah.
Sort of bringing it around from what you were saying with the videos. I suppose that's a good way to finish this little topic of the video side of stuff. I know when I was growing up, it was DVDs were the method of taking that kind of information in. I know I used to get my hands on all sorts of. Our local music shop had a great sort of rotating stand with all the DVDs on of various, masterclasses or instructional videos from different players. So I picked up a few of them back then. The ones that I suppose stand out, there was a great Simon Phillips one, which is so 1980s, it's incredible. He's still got long hair, and he's got full Tama branded leggings and all that on, like very and a sweatband and all that. And it's, you look at it and it looks so dated now when you watch it back. But actually, what he's talking about, all of the stuff that he's on about with his double bass drum stuff and some of his shuffles and everything, it's still relevant with the way he plays. And so I remember getting hold of that one. And there's a Steve Gadd in session one as well, which is it's just a Gadd masterclass of the best sense. And that one I've watched many times. And then there was also there's a few I've got my hands on. There's a Todd Suckerman Methods and Mechanics, which I really need to go back and dive through again, because there was some really good information that probably when I first watched it, when I was about 13, 14, I probably didn't take as much from it as I would if I watched it now. And I, as you know, I was a big Neil Peart fan for a long time and still am. And his instructional DVDs were great as well. He did one on drum soloing, one on coming up with drum parts for an album, for new songs, which was quite interesting, which sort of touched on all of his studies with the late Freddie Gruber, who was an American jazz drummer, sort of teacher extraordinaire. And the one that I did make a note of to sort of mention in this was the one he did about live performance and in his sort of approach to touring and rehearsing for a tour, and how he goes about bringing recorded parts to a live stage, which was, they call it taking centre stage, and that was a really good one. And Joe Bergamini, who's a great drum teacher and educator, American guy, he did all of the interviews for that, and he did all the transcriptions, and wrote a book that went alongside it, which handily I've also got within arm's reach. You can see how often some of these books get used just by how close I have them. But that's the book, and there was a DVD that I think the DVD's got about 6 hours worth of viewing on it, But what he did in this was all the songs that they went through on the DVD, the entire set list of the tour, all of the songs are all fully transcribed. So you can actually sit through it, and me being I suppose the average viewer of that probably isn't a reader of drum score, but for me, I could, it's great to actually sit and dive into some of those parts with a bit more of a bit more of a magnifying glass than maybe the average Neil Peart fan or Rush listener would actually do with them. So yeah, Joe Bergamini did an incredible job on that, because they are so accurate and so well put together transcriptions. Because some of those transcription books I'm always a bit dubious of the probably 85% correct. And there's a little bit where they were like, you could read it a few different ways or write it a few different ways, but that's pretty damn close. So I don't know if you went down the probably you're a bit younger than me, so you were probably more the watching masterclasses and stuff on YouTube more than probably buying the DVDs. Like I used to.
Yeah, I did think about that, because although we're not that far apart in age, I did start playing quite a lot after you, later than you. So yeah, it was less sort of DVDs, more YouTube stuff. But I've never, it's we've touched on before, the Scots bass lessons and the talking bass and those things. There's so much out there, but I love watching the behind the scenes things of tours, and like you say, there's a lot of great tools out there of transcriptions of live things. I know Andrew Gold, I'm not sure if it still is on his website, but for years you could get a lot of the scores to his songs, and so all that stuff's there. And most of my things that may have come from DVDs or transcriptions have come from my bass lessons, so probably a nice way to bring it back round to
another artist who definitely has got that same thing like you say about Andrew Gold was Lee Ritner. He's got, I think, scores and transcriptions of pretty much every album, and they're all free to download from his website, because I plucked a few of them a few years ago for just to have a look through, because he did a live DVD with Simon Phillips, I think, in Tokyo with Lee Ritner and Mike Stern. And although there's no drum parts for any of these things, just getting hold of the score and working my way through it with my drummer's brain on, trying to suss out what all of these harmonic things meant, was quite interesting. And and it meant that when I, if I turned to try and play some of those little pieces or some of those sections that I liked, I could put the score down and sort of be able to navigate the arrangement, if nothing else. Obviously I couldn't try and emulate what Simon Phillips was doing on there, because he was absolutely on fire on that recording, but being able to actually follow the arrangement was kind of useful. And so I'm sure he's probably still doing. But yeah, Lee Ritner's website has got loads and loads of stuff, because I definitely took a few downloads from it back then. But yeah, on that sort of note, I think that sort of wraps us up. We've covered everything from tutors to clinics to books, DVDs, one-off lessons, masterclasses, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's been a good one.
It has. It's been hopefully an educational one, which makes a change for us.
Yeah, well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Groovecast, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.